I feel a little ill-prepared because I had planned on wearing a kilt and explaining how my sister had taught me. So now I have to change my plan. Thank you so much, David, for inviting me and having me share your fantastic audience. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of my target demographic. Wow, I will be presenting for you this evening the story of the world's stupidest mugging, of which I was a victim when I was 21 years old. Ronald Reagan was president, though he did not know it at the time. Well, it's nice to hear that warm word. Some people get very uncomfortable. You shouldn't make jokes about that. That's tragic. My grandmother had Alzheimer's, and she told me, Dylan, we are Jews. We do not believe in tragedy. We believe in horror, atrocity, and injustice, and we recognize them all as hilarious. Of course, she also said we must never forget, and the last time I visited her, she had reached that stage in the illness where she could still recognize me, but every time she saw me, she thought it was my birthday and gave me $5. So it was exhausting to deal with, because I had to keep going in and out of that room. And for the record, that is not a self-loathing anti-Semitic joke about a cultural relationship to money. That is a self-loathing anti-capitalist joke about a societal relationship to money. And then my mother was all freaked out and said, Dylan, you have to promise me when I start to show symptoms, you'll tell me so I know when it's time to take my own life. I had to say, Mom, we just had this conversation 20 minutes ago. That's not the story I'm here to tell you this evening. Ronald Reagan was president, and some of you may not remember, I'm not implying that you're all too young, I looked at the crowd earlier, and there may be some memory issues. Ronald Reagan had a welfare reform proposal that was based on the concept that the best way to discourage people from being poor is to take away their money. And I went up to Columbia University in New York City to hear my sister deliver a lecture. I should explain, my sister is gay. I love her like a brother. And she is the single mother of a beautiful daughter who was deliberately conceived in a loving act between my sister and a turkey baster, briefly filled with mail-ordered sperm. Just one of the reasons I will not do Thanksgiving dinner at my sister's place. Mom, get that out of the butter. You don't know where it's been. We just had this conversation 20 minutes ago. In any case, my sister takes this stuff. My sister was briefly on government assistance, not because she is a slacker or lazy or a drain on society, but because she had been fired from her bartending job when they caught her breastfeeding her infant in a back room on a break, at an establishment that proudly displays posters of the Course Girls. Because we live in a bizarre society where it's okay to use breasts to sell beer, but not to feed children. It is so nice to perform for people who applaud for me. Oh, just give me a second to enjoy where I am in my life. That's enough. I only have 7 minutes. I don't have time to waste on laughter and applause. So I went to hear my sister speak about this at Columbia University in New York City, and I left the auditorium and walked a few blocks across town to take a bus back down to where I lived. And I found myself waiting for a bus much farther north on the island of Manhattan than any young middle-class white man should ever be, as it was nearing midnight in January. It was very cold. I sat on a bench and waited for the bus, and my breath steamed in the night air. And a large African-American man came out of the building behind me. Well, it was the mid-'80s, so he was still a big black guy. He came out of the building behind me and sat down next to me. And he and I sat together waiting for the bus with our breath steaming in the night air. And after about 5 minutes, he said, "Give me all your money." And I said, "What?" And he said, "I'm mugging you." And I said, "Well, do you have a knife or something?" Like now we're playing Let's Make a Deal. Can you show me a hard-boiled egg? He said no. But if you want, I could go in and get a knife. I did not want that. So I gave him the $6 that I had in my pocket. And then my mugger and I sat together and waited for the bus, with our breath steaming in the night air, until I realized there was a problem, and I said, "Well, now I can't get on the bus." And he said, "Oh, sorry," and handed back $1. Was at the time the cost of a bus ride on the island of Manhattan, so I took the $1. And I said, "Thank you." To my mugger. And we waited for the bus, steaming in the night air. And the bus came. It was empty except for the driver. It would be weird if it was completely empty. It was the woman driving the bus. And I thought about getting on and saying, "Hey, this guy just mugged me." But now it was $5 he'd taken, and there was no knife, so it felt less like reporting a crime than telling on a guy. So I put the $1 in the machine, went and found a seat. He got on behind me, and he put one of my $1 in the machine. Sat a few rows behind me. And after we'd gone a few blocks, he tapped me on the shoulder, and I said, "What?" And he held out 2 of the remaining $4 and said, "Why don't you take half of this money back? You really always ought to have some cash on you." That seemed sensible. So I took the $2 from the mugger, and again I said, "Thank you." And we rode on into the night. And after we'd gone several more blocks, he rang the bell to tell the driver to pull over so he could get off. As we were pulling over to the curb, he tapped me on the shoulder again. I said, "What?" And he sort of sheepishly held out the last $2 and said, "Why don't you take the rest of this money back? I really just needed bus fare." And it dawned on me for the first time that we live in a bizarre society where it's less humiliating to be a criminal than a little short on cash. But by now I felt like I had bonded with my mugger. So I said, "Why don't you hang on to that? You really always want to have some cash on." My mugger thanked me and got off the bus. Apparently the bus driver caught the tail end of this conversation. Apparently she was a Reagan Republican, because as we pulled away from the curb, she said, "You know, you really shouldn't give them poor people money. It only encourages them." Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I have never loved you more than I do at this moment. I would like to bring back to the stage a man who has changed my life in innumerable ways, who is more kind and more generous of spirit than anybody I have ever met in the entertainment industry, whose warmth and kindness has been more meaningful to me than he can imagine. Please welcome David Sedaris.
Isn't he the greatest?
Yeah.